Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's WOTS Weekly Feature. Today, we're talking pride, queerness, and storytelling with Derrick Chow, one of the contributors to TO Comics' beloved comic anthologies. I'm Sienna Tristan, and I'll be your host. WOTS Toronto operates on land that is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. This territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Anishinaabeg and Allied Nations to care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes in peace. We encourage you to educate yourself about the land that you're living on, wherever you're tuning in from. My guest today is Derrick Chow. Derrick is a writer, comic creator, and illustrator. His comic short stories have been featured in several anthologies, including Shout Out from TO Comix Press and Rainbow Reflections, body image comics for queer men from Ad Astra Comics. His illustrations have been published in many newspapers and magazines, including the Literary Review of Canada, This Magazine, and the Toronto Star. As a reader and writer, he's keenly interested in middle grade tales of suspense, magic, and adventure. And in YA and adult, he is drawn to stories of restless teens finding love and connection and tales of eldritch horror in unlikely places. He lives in Toronto with his husband in a coterie of teddy bears. Welcome, Derrick.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you this afternoon. I would love to jump right in and I want to know all about you. Tell us a little bit about your journey as an illustrator and as a writer. How did you get started? And what have been some of your major milestones up until this point?
Sure. Illustration is something I pretty much have been interested in since I was a kid and didn't even have a term for it. I was always drawing in the margins of my books and wanting to add my own images to my chapter books that I was reading. In terms of when I actually decided it was a career I wanted to pursue, I think that would have been in high school and university. I was very active in the student paper scene, and just the idea of reading an article and deciding how to add to it, how to sort of bring a visual element to it was a really exciting thing for me. So after I graduated from university, I was lucky to be able to get some freelance gigs with the Toronto Star and also the Chronicle Herald out east, because they had some sort of youth-oriented articles at the time that they were looking for younger illustrators to pair with those articles. So that was a good fit. From there, I ended up doing illustration work for children's books. So that was anywhere from textbooks, illustrations to trade picture books. So that's sort of my illustration journey and how I got into this business.
I've creeped your portfolio online because it's so colorful and vibrant and interesting. And I did see quite a lot of very thoughtful pieces in terms of illustrating things for, I don't know, I was looking at things for student loans and unions and lots of very sort of involved issues based illustrations, which I guess can have a different mental component than just making something really aesthetically pretty. So I think that's really interesting stuff, and I'm glad that they commissioned you for all of this because it checks out. It looks great, and it also conveys the what they're talking about.
No, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to ask if there's more to it.
Oh,
No. Just there's probably more to it than just thinking about aesthetic composition when you're trying to talk about sort of issues like that.
Yeah, no, I was just saying I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of great art directors, and it's always really challenging and fun being brought onto a project like a magazine illustration or newspaper illustration, because each art director sort of has something else that they want to bring to it, or there's one aspect of the story they want to highlight in the visuals. So it's about reading something very quickly, condensing the information, and trying to tease something out of it that maybe the viewer wouldn't have, or the reader wouldn't have initially cottoned onto. So yeah.
That translation is a really interesting skill to refine over time, definitely. So I would love to hear a little bit more about your contributions to TO Comix Press specifically. I know you've had comics in both Shout Out, which is an anthology of queer-focused comics, and also you were in Young at Heart, which is an anthology that celebrates and sometimes critiques Toronto as a city. So tell us a little bit about those stories and kind of what you were trying to convey with each of them.
Yeah, so the first story I did for Theo Comics was for Young at Heart, and that story was called Break and Enter. And it's sort of a sweet coming of age love story between two young people in the gay community in Toronto. And it's all set within one night. And I decided to do that because I was very inspired by a lot of stories and movies that I've seen and read in which all the action takes place over the course of one wild night. Because I think there's
Mm-hmm.
something very exciting about that sort of intense time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it sort of mimics the experience that a lot of us have had where we've connected with someone so strongly that we just kind of didn't want the night to end. Really, what I wanted to explore in that was two queer people who, for various reasons, don't feel like they quite fit in to the local queer scene.
Queer community.
One be
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Because as welcoming and inclusive as it can be, for marginalized people, it can sometimes feel a bit alienating. One character is Asian Canadian, the other one is trans, and for various reasons, they don't feel like they fit in. Over the course of the evening, they realize they have more, not just in common, but a personal past that they share that they didn't realize. So yeah, that's that story. The second story I did was for um, Shout Out, which is a queer anthology, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really exciting because I want to do a completely different genre that I've never written before, just science fiction. It's also a queer coming of age love story, but I wanted it to have like higher stakes. So it's set in like an alternate digital dimension, almost like video game characters in a video game. But there's an imminent apocalypse coming. Their
Ooh.
little digital world is about to be shut down. So the two main characters who've been friends since they were little boys start to think there might be more to their relationship than just friendship. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of a race against the clock, a love story set against an apocalypse, which I thought was a really interesting idea to tackle.
As somebody who loves like a dash of sci-fi fantasy in their queer fic, like this is so up my alley. So this is, this kind of gets at the heart of the most exciting part of the conversation for me, which is the fact that so many of your stories are informed by your life experience as both a queer and a racialized person, human being. And you've mentioned before that it also has a large impact on the stories you choose to tell and how you choose to tell them. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how these identities have informed your storytelling as a practice.
Yeah, I think first of all, just on a basic level of wanting to tell stories, I think the one of the main reasons why I was driven to tell stories both in prose and comic form is because growing up, most of the stories I have to consume because of the time and place I live in, kind of centered characters that didn't necessarily look like me or didn't necessarily share my life experience, either because I'm queer and also because I'm ethnic minority, a racialized person. I just really wanted to write stories in which protagonists like me were at the center, whether they're exciting sci-fi stories or chilling horror or coming of age tale. So that definitely has informed me as a writer. I think also just sort of narratively, if I were to step back and look at all of my characters, I think one thing they all have in common is they, for one reason or other, they all don't quite feel like they fit in to either family or society or the community they decide to be a part of. And I think that definitely is informed by being from, a marginalized community myself.
Mm-hmm. I went to a conference recently on story movement to the nebulas recently, and I believe it was Henry Lien who said that there are kind of two main ways that people often tackle representation in storytelling, whether it's fiction, comic arts, etc. One way is like issues based, like really kind of coming in tight on, an issue of perhaps discrimination or systemic oppression or so on, and like that's what the story is about. Versus the other way, which is, I think he mentioned it called normalization. So like this actually has not very much to do with the A plot of whatever's going on, but these characters are here and they exist. And like the world is a world that is friendly to their existence. And I'm curious about not where you come down on, because I think everyone can do both, but just where you find yourself leaning these days in terms of what you prefer to work on and why.
Yeah, no, that's a great question because I think it really brings me back to being a reader. Where when I was young and I was curious to see stories that featured me, at that time I would maybe find some Canadian stories centering, for example, a Canadian Asian character, but
Mm.
it would often be historical. It would be set in
Huh.
100 years ago. It would be about build the building of the Canadian Pacific Railroad, and which is important, I think, highlighting our past as racialized people is important. But I think for a lot of readers, what they're really hungry for is, and I think this is the normalization part that you're talking about, is just
Yeah.
seeing themselves represented in fun, exciting, scary, touching media. We just want to see ourselves in as the protagonist of every type of story. So I think the real answer is like diversity of content and genre is important. So, we need everything from stories that tackle the heavy issues and
Hmm.
historical texts, but we also need, fun, you know, fun
There's like
tales.
satirical romps. Yeah,
Yeah,
chaos.
exactly. Yeah, in terms of, my what I've written so far, I think I've tended to lean towards just sort of having fun, trying to tell a fun tale, but
Mhm.
making sure that I'm true to my roots and incorporating those elements into the story, those elements of being, uh, from a marginalized community, for example.
Definitely. Do you think that there are, I'm sure there are, I'm sure you have plenty of these, but are there any particular angles or stories that you don't feel like you've had either the space or the resources to tell yet, or maybe that you're not quite ready to tackle them just because you need to, develop in your own life? Like what's on the horizon? What's your like in your wish list of like stuff that you wanna work on?
Yeah, there's definitely in the YA sphere, I would love to tell a long form, just big gushy romantic tale, and that's something I think I'm ready for. I'm not working on it yet, so that is something I'm really excited to tell, and I definitely would love to mesh, the world of genre fiction with that. So I love, stories like Aiden Thomas's Cemetery Boys,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
kind of has the exciting genre supernatural element mixed with a bit of romance. So yeah, I'd like to work on something like that. That's one thing that's on the horizon, I think maybe.
I'm glad to. I'll be looking for it, with bated breath. I'm very excited. As a queer person, I also have this same experience of having grown up with not particularly many. I wouldn't even call them role models, just like mirrors at all, anywhere. Not being able to see my experience in anything that was being fed to me as far as media consumption goes. And now, as an adult, it's nice to kind of reparent myself. To like find the like adult fiction is great and all, but even just to find like middle grade and YA and like give it to like my teen self and my little hindbrain and be like, here, this is for you.
Yeah,
So
no, I
yeah.
think that's a good point. I think as queer readers, oftentimes we don't get to experience that, YA or teen content until we're actually adults. I mean, I think that's changing for people who are teens right now. I'm very
Yeah.
glad.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think I think that's one thing that we really have to stay connected to, which is our younger selves as both readers and authors. I think that's very like a heady, exciting time in our lives when so many of our opinions are formed. There's so much optimism and possibility in that sort of time frame as readers and as characters. So that's why I think I feel a lot of affinity towards middle grade and YA. It's a,
Mm-hmm.
it's a period and genre I'm really connected to.
Yeah, definitely. And just because we've sort of physically transitioned out of it doesn't necessarily mean that we've like emotionally achieved the like milestones that you're supposed to achieve like at that time until you again come across these resources or these supports or even these communities
Mhm.
and get to really ground yourself in them. So I think it's great work. Um, I would love to, speaking of communities, ask a little bit about your experience as like a queer and marginalized creator, like an artist in a community of artists, and what that's been like for you.
Yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate in that pretty much all of my experience, most of my experiences, in the industry, whether it's with anthologies and TO Comics and or magazines, newspapers, or prose writing, people have been very welcoming and eager to hear my stories and to listen to my viewpoint and my opinions. It's definitely, I mean, that's the most important thing, to find people who want to work with you and people who kind of respect your point of view. I mean, I don't mean to say people who won't criticize you or give you, feedback. That's very important as a writer
Different.
too. But
Yeah.
yeah, but exactly. But people who are coming at it from the right point of view and who have been and open ears. And so I've been very fortunate, and going to comic book festivals as part of the anthologies I've been part of. I've been so fortunate, along with all the other talented creators I'm in these anthologies with, to meet readers, often young readers, who are they're buying the book and just really excited to read it, or who have already read previous iterations of those anthologies, like the Theo Comic ones, and will say, "Oh, I really love these. I collect them." And so, I mean, just on a basic level as a creator, it's just been very warm and fuzzy being able to interact with
Yeah.
people like that, with readers, the
I was
audience.
going to ask, like, what's like the one of them, and I know there's probably more than one of them, but like one of the most like exciting or like affirming moments that you've had in your career of like, oh yeah, like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm rocking it right now.
Yeah, I think it was actually at a convention. It was at the TCAF, the Toronto Comic Arts Convention,
We love
and
TCAF.
yeah, it's great. I can't wait for the pandemic to be over so we can all go there in person. But yeah, no, I was there, and I this was a shadow anthology, and a young uh, person bought the book, and like an hour later they came back and they were talking to the creators, and they said to me that they really loved my story, which is such a silly, simple thing, but it was just,
No.
as a creator, as an author slash writer, I feel like I'm shocked and humbled and grateful anytime anyone reads my story. I mean, I was just telling this to a friend the other day, that from an editor to an agent to just a person in the street or even my friend, I'm always like surprised someone is reading my story, even if it's because I'm asking them to. I'm like, why would you take time of your day to read something I wrote made up in my head? It's still a very surreal experience for me. So to hear anyone say anything positive is just, for me, mind blowing at this point. It's still very exciting to hear that sort of feedback.
I completely understand. I don't think it ever quite goes away. And I think that's part of the magic of it, of just like people are connecting. It's so exciting.
Yeah, yeah.
So as a marginalized, comic creator and writer, what's one thing you wish you'd known right at the beginning of your career? And you can sort of transport this into what would you want for, aspiring creators to know, but just what's something that you think would have really helped you out or given you a boost if someone had told you straight off the bat?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, because it's a sort of thing you don't think of until after you get to certain milestones. You can see the more challenging parts of being a creator. And I think for me, being specifically a marginalized creator, it gets back to the idea of being surprised, and would want to read my stories and being very humbled by it. But it also it comes there's a vulnerability that's attached to that. So sharing any story as a creator, even if it's completely fictional, like set in a fantastical science fiction world, you still put a lot of yourself in characters and into the viewpoint of that world. And if there is someone who doesn't like something about it or is critical about it in a certain way, as valid as that is, of course, everyone has many opinions about different stories, and that's okay. But as a creator, it's hard not to take that on personally. It's obviously a personal critique, and that is something that's been. I don't want to say a challenge, because I've just been so grateful to be able to do what I love. But um, that's something I would tell my younger self. Just, you got to have a thick skin. Like, you've got to have open ears and be open to feedback from people you trust, whether it's from a literary agent or from an editor. I mean, I think that's important. You always want to be a sponge and learn. Take every criticism as an opportunity to learn and grow. It doesn't mean every bit of criticism is something you agree with, but more often than not, it is an opportunity to learn and just shut your ears off. Oh, they're haters. That's one side of the coin. But the other side of the coin is you have to have, like, or I think you have to have somewhat of a thick skin to be like, all right, whatever this person's going to say about it, it's not about you as a person. It's their
About the
opinion and it's
work
about your
and
work. Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what I would tell myself.
Definitely. I think trying to learn a healthy separation between yourself and the art that you make is something that is not taught very early on. And then we all kind of learn it the hard way.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I mean,
Wow.
as creators, we're very like passionate, emotion. We tend to be very kind of emotional, sensitive people. So
We're
that's something that.
sensitive critters. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes we just gotta try to, as you said, separate yourself from it. Kind of have a thick skin, or as much as one can. Yeah.
Definitely. So we've spoken a lot about comics here, but also we've been hinting at reading and writing other types of storytelling as well. I would love to hear about the other exciting work that you have forthcoming. I'm particularly excited to hear there's a novel that you've written.
Yeah.
Can we
Yeah.
hear a little bit about Ravenous Things?
Yeah, this is really exciting that I can finally talk about it because it's just announced publicly and it's been a secret for a while. So I wrote a
Congratulations.
thank you. So I wrote a prose novel. So this is not a comic, but it's very exciting for me because I put a lot of my heart into it. It's called Ravenous Things. It's coming out from Disney Hyperion in summer
It's
of
a great title.
2022. It's I'm hoping very evocative. It's a creepy horror fantasy, and I don't want to say too much about it yet, except sort of the broad themes, I guess. But it's a book that I kind of came up with when I was struggling with the grief of the death of my father, and it was a very difficult time. To be dealing with, obviously, and it was kind of strange that as I was trying to tackle it in my head, uh, what came out of it was this twisty, turny, middle grade fantasy horror adventure. But that seemed to be the best way for me to deal with all those emotions. And so it's set kind of underground, the unknown subway tunnels of Toronto, and there is a sort of Pied Piper element to it. So it's kind of my very broad reimagining of the Pied Piper tale. So yeah, it's a story that I think any middle grade reader who's into horror, who's into fantasy worlds will be into. So yeah, I'm really excited about it.
I'm really excited to this day, there are still so few books comparatively that are set in Toronto, especially again, like you say, sort of like spec books, like sci-fi books, fantasy books, genre books. There's plenty of contemporary by this point. I'm very happy about that, but there aren't too many speculative fiction works that are set in our fair city. So I'm excited to see how it is that you've incorporated the city as setting it as a character on its own into this work.
Yeah, no, it was a very interesting process or a book to work on because I wasn't actively trying to make it a book about Toronto. I wanted to make it a book about places I knew and happened to live in Toronto. But so there are a lot of locations that feature very important or very heavily in it. So, for example, St. Patrick's subway station figures very heavily in it. That's where a lot of the action takes place. Sort of secret, but I don't want to say too much. But that's where a lot of the action takes place. And also, a few landmarks are referred to, like the Lillian H. Smith Library, which is one of my favorite libraries in the city because it has that great Merrill Lynch sci-fi fantasy collection. Yeah, so it was fun incorporating these important landmarks from my childhood and from my life into this really fantastical, very not realistic, tale. It has changeling rats in it and magical spells, and yeah, it's definitely was shaped by my experience in the city.
I'll have to do like a walking / public transit tour of the book once everyone can kind of be out in public again. It's very cool.
Yeah, I can make some money doing that. I'll just stand in the street with signs. Giving tours to my own book.
Oh my gosh, I would go. I would go. That would be so much fun. All right. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for 20 minutes. And I can't wait to see everything coming out. And I mean, readers at home, if you want to go take a look at what Derrick's already got out, you can go take a look at the anthologies from TO Comix Press. But otherwise, get Ravenous Things on your list. When does it come out again? 2022?
Summer 2022.
Summer of 2022. Put it on your TBR piles, my friends.
And thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
I'm so glad. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too.
And thank you all for watching with us. This has been today's WOTS Weekly Feature. You can find Derrick Chow's comics alongside many other wonderful queer creators in Shout Out, the anthology from TO Comix Press. For more of Derrick's illustration work, you can visit derrickchow.ca. Tune in next week for our second Pride Week, which features talks with Laurie Stewart, Shameless Magazine, and Coach House Books. For discounts and deals, you can check out toronto.thewordonthestreet.ca/weekly-features. And from all of us at the WOTS team, happy Pride.